The dust storms on Outpost Theta 7 never truly ceased. They only paused, like a predator catching its breath before the next lunge. Nestled in the rust-colored canyons of Proxima Centauri's third moon, the outpost was less a beacon of human ingenuity and more a stubborn afterthought, clinging to the edge of known space with frayed wires and flickering hope. Its population, 12 souls, 3 hydroponic algae tanks, and 1 very disgruntled maintenance bot named Clank. Among those 12 was Milo Wren, a man whose greatest ambition had once been to open a bakery on Mars, but who now spent his days patching airlock seals and dreaming of cinnamon rolls that didn't taste like recycled protein paste. Milo was not a hero. He wasn't even particularly brave. He flinched at loud noises, cried during old Earth rom-coms, and once fainted when a drone malfunctioned and sprayed him with synthetic lavender-scented coolant. Yet, on the evening the sky cracked open like a rotten egg and something impossibly bright descended through the ochre clouds, it was Milo who stood on the cracked permacrete landing pad, squinting upward with a wrench in one hand and a half-eaten nutrient bar in the other. The ship that landed wasn't sleek or menacing in the way alien vessels were supposed to be in the holodramas Milo secretly watched during his night shift. It was bulbous, pearlescent, and shaped vaguely like an overgrown teardrop, its surface shimmering with iridescent swirls that shifted from silver to pale gold as it cooled. No weapons bristled from its hull. No ominous hum vibrated through the ground. Instead, a soft chime echoed across the canyon, melodic and strangely soothing, like wind through crystal chimes on a summer afternoon. Then the ramp lowered, and she stepped out. She was tall, taller than any human Milo had ever seen, but moved with a grace that made her seem weightless. Her skin was the color of fresh snow under moonlight, flawless and luminous, and her hair, long and straight, fell like spun platinum around her shoulders. She wore a form-fitting suit of woven light that clung to her like liquid silk, shimmering faintly with every breath. Her eyes, large and almond-shaped, glowed a soft violet, and when they locked onto Milo's, he felt a strange warmth bloom in his chest. Not fear, not awe, but something closer to recognition, as if he'd known her in another life, or perhaps in a dream he'd long forgotten. Behind him, Clank beeped nervously and rolled backward into a supply crate. Milo swallowed hard, dropped the nutrient bar, which Clank immediately tried to vacuum up, and raised his hands slowly. Welcome to Outpost Theta 7, he said, voice cracking slightly. Population 12 if you count Clank, which technically we don't, but he counts himself, so 13? Anyway, do you need something? The alien woman tilted her head, studying him with an expression that mingled curiosity and something deeper, sorrow, perhaps, or exhaustion. Then she spoke, her voice like honey poured over starlight. I am Queen Lyra of the Valari Dominion. She paused, as if testing the weight of the words. And I have come to hide. Milo blinked. Hide? Yes. She stepped forward, and the air around her seemed to ripple, charged with an energy that made the hairs on Milo's arms stand on end. My empire spans 7 galaxies. My fleets have shattered stars and rewritten the laws of physics. I have commanded legions that could unmake worlds with a whisper. She looked down at her hands, then back at him, her violet eyes suddenly vulnerable. And yet, I cannot protect my daughter. Milo's brain stuttered. He'd heard of the Valari. Everyone had. They were the boogeymen of the galactic fringe, the ruthless conquerors who absorbed civilizations not through war, but through something far more insidious: assimilation. Their queen was said to feed on the memories of entire species, draining them until only hollow shells remained. Holodramas depicted her as a skeletal horror with fangs and tentacles, cackling as she devoured planets. And yet here she stood, ethereal, exhausted, and asking for sanctuary like a lost traveler at a roadside inn. Your daughter, Milo managed. Lyra nodded. From the folds of her luminous suit, she drew forth a small, pulsing orb of soft blue light. It hovered between her palms, humming gently. Her name is Syl, she said, her voice thick with emotion. She is only 3 cycles old. In Valari terms, that is infancy. She has not yet undergone the awakening. She does not know what she is capable of. And that is why they want her. Who wants her? The conclave of shattered minds, Lyra whispered, her voice dropping to a near-silent tremor. A splinter faction within my own court. They believe the Valari have grown soft, that we must return to our roots, consume, dominate, erase. They see Syl not as a child, but as a weapon, a pure vessel of primordial Valari power, untainted by conscience. If they take her, they will twist her, break her, Turn her into a god of annihilation. Milo stared at the glowing orb, imagining a child curled inside that light. He thought of his sister's baby back on Earth. How tiny her fingers were, how she'd grip his pinky with surprising strength. A lump formed in his throat. "Why here?" he asked. "Why Theta 7? We're barely a dot on the star charts." "Precisely," Lyra said, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "The Conclave scours the major systems, the trade hubs, the fortified worlds. They would never think to look in a place like this. A forgotten speck orbiting a dying star. Run by... What did you call yourself?" "A baker." Milo flushed. Formerly aspiring. Currently, duct tape and hope technician. Lyra's smile widened, genuine this time. "Then you understand the value of quiet places, of hidden things, of love baked into small, imperfect creations." She stepped closer, and for the first time, Milo noticed the faint tremor in her hands. "I cannot stay long. My presence draws attention. But I must leave Syl with someone. Someone who will not see her as a weapon. Someone who will see her as a child." Before Milo could protest, because surely there had to be someone better, someone trained, someone not prone to fainting at the smell of lavender. Lyra pressed the glowing orb into his hands. It was warm, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. A wave of calm washed over him, and for a moment, he saw flashes. A silver forest under twin suns, a lullaby sung in a language of light, a small hand reaching for his. "I'll be back," Lyra said, her voice firm now, regal once more. "When the storm passes, guard her, Milo Ren. Not with weapons but with kindness. That is the only shield she needs." Then she turned, ascended the ramp, and the pearlescent ship lifted off without sound, vanishing into the bruised sky as quickly as it had come. Milo stood there for a long time, the orb cradled in his arms, Clank whirring anxiously at his feet. Back in the outpost's common room, the others were gathered around a flickering screen, arguing over ration allocations. None of them had seen the ship. None of them knew their quiet, clumsy technician now held the most dangerous child in the universe. Over the next few days, life on Theta 7 continued its usual rhythm of minor crises and monotony. Milo, however, moved through it like a man in a dream. He'd rigged a cradle from spare insulation foam and old sensor pads, placing it near his bunk. The orb, Syl, would pulse brighter when he spoke to her, dimming when he left the room. Sometimes, when he hummed old Earth tunes while fixing a leaky pipe, the orb would emit soft chimes that harmonized with his voice. Once, during a particularly violent dust storm that rattled the walls like a beast trying to get in, Syl's light flared so brightly it illuminated the entire module, and the storm outside paused. Just for a moment, the wind stilled, the dust hung suspended in the air. Then it resumed, but Milo knew what he'd seen. He didn't tell anyone. Not yet. He feared their fear. Feared they'd see Syl as a threat, not a child. But secrets have weight, and on a station this small, they press against the walls until they crack. It happened during dinner. Milo had been distracted, stirring his nutrient stew absently while watching Syl's orb float gently above his tray. She'd begun to manifest small projections. Flickering images of alien flowers, miniature constellations, once even a perfect replica of Clank that beeped and rolled in place before dissolving into light. That night, she projected a tiny, shimmering bird made of stardust. It fluttered around Milo's head, chirping in a melody that made his eyes water. "Milo," said Dr. Eris Thorne, the outpost's medic and resident skeptic, peering over his glasses. "What in the void is that?" Milo froze. Experimental hologram? New morale program. Since when does morale chirp in C#? Eris leaned forward, eyes narrowed. And since when do holograms make the air smell like rain on alien soil? Before Milo could fabricate another lie, the lights flickered, then died. Emergency reds flared on. Alarms blared. Not the usual leak or power surge, but the deep, guttural wail of an unscheduled arrival. External sensors detected a vessel. No transponder, no hails, just a silent, obsidian wedge hovering over the canyon like a blade. Milo's blood turned to ice. He scooped up Syl's orb and ran for the observation deck. Through the reinforced viewport, he saw it. A ship of jagged angles and matte black, bristling with weapon ports that glowed a sickly green. And descending from it on a beam of dark energy were figures, tall, gaunt, their skin the color of dried blood, their eyes hollow pits of crimson light. Valari, but twisted, corrupted. The Conclave, Milo whispered. Behind him, the others gathered, faces pale. Milo, Eris said slowly. You've got some explaining to do. There was no time. The Conclave enforcers moved with terrifying speed, breaching the outer airlock with a pulse that shattered the reinforced glass. Milo shoved Syl into a hidden compartment beneath his bunk. Stay quiet, little one, he murmured, and grabbed the only weapon he had. A high-torque plasma wrench. It wasn't much, but it was heavy, and it sparked when he activated it. The first enforcer stepped into the corridor, its movements unnaturally smooth. It didn't speak. It simply raised a clawed hand, and the air around Milo thickened, pressing down like a physical weight. He gasped, struggling to breathe. But then a chime, soft, clear, from his bunk. The enforcer's head snapped toward the sound, its hollow eyes flaring. Milo didn't think. He swung the wrench, connected with the creature's arm, sending sparks flying. The enforcer hissed, a sound like tearing metal, and backhanded him into the wall. Pain exploded in his ribs, but he scrambled up, yelling, "Run! Get to the escape pods!" Chaos erupted. Eris grabbed a fire extinguisher and sprayed freezing foam into another enforcer's face. Clank, in a moment of unexpected heroism, rolled between the legs of a third, tangling its feet with his cables. But they were outmatched. The Conclave moved like shadows given form, their power bending space itself. Then the lights went out again. But this time it wasn't a power failure. The entire outpost was bathed in a soft, blue-white radiance. Syl floated in the center of the corridor, no longer an orb, but a small figure, barely knee-high to Milo, with white skin, blonde hair, and eyes like twin galaxies. She held out her hands, and the air shimmered. The enforcers froze, not from force, but from something deeper. Their crimson eyes flickered, and for a moment, they looked confused, haunted. One whispered a word in the old Valari tongue. "Mother!" Syl tilted her head, then blew a gentle breath. The enforcers dissolved into motes of light, their forms unraveling like smoke in a breeze. The black ship outside shuddered, its dark energy flickering out, and retreated into the storm. Silence fell. Milo stared at the child before him, who yawned, rubbed her eyes, and floated gently back into his arms, reverting to her orb form. She was exhausted. So was he. Back in the common room, no one spoke for a long time. Finally, Eris cleared his throat. "So, Alien Queen's daughter, huh?" Milo nodded weakly. "And you're babysitting the apocalypse?" In a manner of speaking. Eris sighed, then offered a small, tired smile. "Well, at least she's polite, and she sings in tune." He paused. "We're not turning her over, are we?" Milo looked down at the softly pulsing orb, felt the warmth of her presence, the trust in her light. "No," he said firmly, "we're not." Outside, the dust storm raged on. But inside Outpost Theta 7, something new had taken root. Not fear, not dread, but a fragile, defiant hope. The most dangerous child in the universe was asleep in a cradle made of scrap and kindness, guarded not by armies, but by a baker who'd never stopped believing in the power of small, quiet things. And somewhere in the void, Queen Lyra watched from the shadows, waiting for the day she could return. Not as a conqueror, but as a mother. Until then, the storm would have to wait. Because even the most dangerous beings sometimes just need a safe place to grow. Days turned into weeks, and the rhythm of Outpost Theta 7 shifted. Not with fanfare, but with the quiet recalibration of hearts. Syl, no longer confined to her orb, began to take more solid form during waking hours. Though she remained small, her limbs delicate as spun glass, her movements a blend of childlike curiosity and otherworldly grace. She spoke little at first, her words emerging in soft chimes or bursts of light that Milo slowly learned to interpret. When she laughed, which she did often, especially when Clank wheeled into walls trying to impress her, the entire module seemed to brighten, the recycled air tasting sweeter, the hum of the life support systems softening into something like a lullaby. Milo, once content to drift through his days with minimal emotional investment, found himself waking earlier just to watch her sleep. Her blonde hair fanned across the makeshift pillow he'd stitched from spare thermal blankets. He started baking again, not real pastries, of course, but he jury-rigged a heating coil and a sealed chamber to mimic an oven, experimenting with algae flour, synthesized vanilla, and crushed mineral salts to approximate sugar. The first batch came out charred and vaguely toxic, but Syl clapped her tiny hands and ate 3 anyway, her eyes glowing brighter with each bite. "Tastes like home," she'd whispered, though she'd never known one. He began reading to her at night, not technical manuals or ration logs, but the tattered Earth novels he'd smuggled aboard years ago. Fairy tales, adventure stories, even dog-eared romances he'd once rolled his eyes at. Syl listened with rapt attention, her small fingers tracing the pages as if she could feel the emotions trapped in the ink. Once, during a passage about a lost child finding shelter in a stranger's barn, she reached out and touched Milo's cheek. A warmth spread through him, not physical but emotional. A flood of comfort, of belonging, as if she'd reached into his chest and gently untangled every knot of loneliness he'd carried since leaving Earth. The others on the outpost watched this transformation with cautious wonder. Eris, ever pragmatic, began documenting Syl's abilities in encrypted logs, not out of suspicion, but scientific awe. He noted how she could coax wilted algae in the hydroponic tanks back to vibrant green with a single hum, how she'd calm electrical surges by placing her palm on a sparking console. Lena Cho, the station's engineer, started leaving small toys near Milo's bunk, carved from scrap metal, shaped like birds or stars, and Syl would animate them with light, sending them fluttering through the corridors in silent, glowing parades. But it wasn't all warmth and wonder. The bond between Milo and Syl deepened in moments of vulnerability. 2. One night, during a particularly violent solar flare that knocked out external comms and plunged the station into near darkness, Syl woke screaming. Not in sound, but in pulses of panicked light that made the walls vibrate. Milo found her curled in a corner, trembling, her form flickering like a dying star. "They're calling me," she sobbed, her voice fractured. "In my dreams. They say I belong to the void." Milo didn't hesitate. He gathered her into his arms, ignoring the faint static that crackled against his skin, and held her tightly. "You belong here," he said, voice rough with emotion. "With me. With us. You're not a weapon, Syl. You're a person. And you're loved." She clung to him, her tears falling not as water, but as tiny droplets of liquid light that evaporated before they hit the floor. After that night, she slept with her hand tucked in his, and he never let go. Humor became their armor. Syl, discovering Earth's concept of pranks, once reprogrammed Clank to speak only in rhyming couplets for an entire shift. "Your boots are scuffed, your hair's askew. Perhaps a nap would help you too." Milo retaliated by hiding her favorite glowing pebble in increasingly absurd places. Inside Eris's coffee mug, taped to the ceiling, once nestled in the belly of a disassembled air filter. She'd chase him through the corridors, giggling, her footsteps leaving faint trails of stardust that lingered for hours. Yet beneath the laughter, a quiet understanding grew. They were each other's refuge. Milo, who'd always felt too soft for the harshness of space, found strength in protecting her. Syl, born into a legacy of cosmic power and expectation, discovered joy in the mundane, the smell of warm bread, the sound of Milo humming off-key while fixing a pipe, the way he'd ruffle her hair even though it shimmered like moonlight and never got messy. One evening, as they sat together on the observation deck watching the twin moons rise over the canyon, Syl leaned her head against his shoulder. "Do you ever miss Earth?" she asked softly. "Sometimes," Milo admitted, "but not as much as I used to." He looked down at her. "Because home isn't a place, is it?" She smiled, a small, knowing thing. "No, it's who you're with." In that moment, the bond between them crystallized, not as guardian and ward, not as human and alien, but as family. And though the Conclave still lurked in the shadows of the galaxy, though Queen Lyra's return remained uncertain, neither of them felt afraid. They had built something real in this forgotten outpost. A sanctuary woven from kindness, laughter, and the quiet courage of two souls who'd chosen each other against all odds. And somewhere in the void, a queen watched through a sliver of folded space, her violet eyes glistening with tears she hadn't known she could still shed. Her daughter was safe, not hidden, not weaponized, but cherished, and that, she realized, was the most powerful force in the universe. The peace on Outpost Theta 7 couldn't last, not in a universe that thrived on chaos. It began subtly, a flicker in the long-range sensors, a distortion in subspace comms that Eris dismissed as solar interference. Then came the dreams. Not Syl's haunted visions, but Milo's. Night after night, he found himself standing in a vast, silver hall beneath twin suns, a throne of woven light before him, and a voice Lyra's, whispering not in gratitude, but in warning. They found a way in, not through space, but through her. He woke drenched in sweat, Syl curled against his chest, her breathing shallow. She'd been quieter lately, her light dimmer, her laughter rarer. When he asked if she was all right, she only shook her head and whispered, "The song is changing." Then the signal arrived. It wasn't a transmission. It was a pulse, silent, invisible to standard scanners, but it resonated through Syl's very being. The moment it hit the outpost, she collapsed, her form dissolving into unstable light. Milo caught her just before she hit the floor, cradling her as her body flickered between child and orb, pain radiating from her in waves. "She's being called," Eris said grimly, scanning her with a modified bioreader. "Not physically, psychically. Someone's activated a genetic lock inside her. A failsafe embedded in her DNA. If she doesn't answer it." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Milo's blood ran cold. Lyra wouldn't do this. "No," Eris agreed. "But the Conclave might have hijacked her royal frequency. Or worse, they've captured Lyra and are using her as a conduit." Panic threatened to swallow Milo whole, but then Syl's hand tightened around his finger. Her eyes, clouded with silver static, focused on his. "Don't let them take me," she breathed. "I don't want to forget you." That was all he needed. While the others fortified the outpost, rerouting power, sealing bulkheads, even welding Clank into a makeshift turret, Milo did the one thing no one expected. He didn't hide Syl. He didn't run. He built a transmitter. Using scavenged parts from decommissioned drones, repurposed comm arrays, and the core of an old entertainment console, he constructed a crude but powerful resonance amplifier. "If they're calling her through her bloodline," he explained, sweat beading on his forehead as he soldered the final connection, "then we answer back. Not with silence, but with something stronger than their command." "What's stronger than a queen's genetic code?" Lena asked, handing him a charged capacitor. "Love," Milo said simply. "Or at least memory." He linked the device to the station's audio archive. Every lullaby he'd hummed, every story he'd read, every laugh Syl had ever made. He recorded his own voice, steady despite the tremor in his hands. "You are Syl. You like cinnamon algae rolls. You hate the sound of air recyclers. You once made Clank recite Shakespeare. You are not a weapon. You are my daughter." Syl, weak but lucid, placed her palm on the emitter. Her light surged into the machine, weaving her essence into the broadcast. Then, with a deep breath, Milo activated it. The pulse that erupted from Theta 7 wasn't destructive. It was declarative. A wave of pure emotional resonance, encoded in light and sound, shot across the void. Not to hide Syl, but to claim her. To tell the universe, in a language deeper than words, that she belonged to someone. That she was loved. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, across the galaxy, Valari outposts flickered. Ancient archives stirred. The Conclave's warships shuddered as their crews, beings who hadn't felt true emotion in centuries, were flooded with sensations they'd long suppressed. Warmth, tenderness, the ache of longing. One by one, their weapons powered down. Their commanders stared at their hands as if seeing them for the first time. And in the heart of the Valari Dominion, deep within a prison of null space where Lyra had been held in stasis, the Queen's eyes snapped open. Tears of liquid starlight streamed down her cheeks as she heard her daughter's voice. Not in command, but in joy, in safety, in love. She shattered her bonds with a single thought. The Conclave fell not to fire, but to feeling. Their ideology, built on cold supremacy, crumbled when confronted with something they couldn't consume. Unconditional love. Within days, their faction dissolved, its members seeking redemption, asylum, or simply silence. Lyra arrived at Theta 7 not as a conqueror, but as a mother returning home. She stepped onto the permacrete pad under a sky streaked with dawn, her white skin glowing, her blonde hair catching the first light of Proxima's rise. Milo stood waiting, Syl beside him, holding his hand. The child didn't run to her mother. She looked up at Milo first, her eyes asking a silent question. He nodded. "Go on." Syl flew into Lyra's arms, and the Queen wept openly, her regal composure melting into raw, human-like relief. But when she turned to Milo, her expression held more than gratitude. It held reverence. "You did what I could not," she said, voice trembling. "You gave her a soul, not just a purpose." Milo shook his head. "She had one all along. I just helped her remember it." Lyra stayed for 3 days. She walked the corridors of the outpost, marveling at the crude beauty of human resilience. She ate one of Milo's charred algae rolls and declared it a masterpiece of intention. She watched Syl animate Clank into dancing constellations and laughed. A sound like bells in a spring wind. On the morning of her departure, she offered Milo a choice. Return with them to the Valari homeworld, where he would be honored as kin, given wealth, status, immortality even. He declined. "This is my home," he said, gesturing to the rusted walls, the flickering lights, the grumbling air recyclers. "And she'll always be welcome here." Lyra understood. She pressed a small crystal into his palm. A shard of her throne, keyed to Syl's essence. "If you ever need us," she said, "just speak her name into this. We will come, not as queen and soldier, as family." Then she and Syl boarded the pearlescent ship. But as the ramp closed, Syl darted back out, threw her arms around Milo, and whispered, "I'll visit, every solstice, and I'll bring real sugar." Milo smiled through his tears. "Deal." The ship ascended, leaving behind silence and a changed man. Life on Theta 7 returned to its familiar rhythms, but nothing was the same. Milo still patched airlocks and argued over rations, but now he did so with a quiet certainty. He'd faced the most dangerous force in the universe. Not with a weapon, but with a lullaby and won. Years later, when new recruits arrived wide-eyed and nervous, they'd ask about the strange glow that sometimes filled the observation deck at night, or why the old technician always left a second chair at his table. Eris would just smile and say, "That's Milo's story, and it's not over yet." Because love, once awakened in the void, never truly fades. It echoes, it returns, and sometimes, on clear nights when the dust storms sleep, you can still hear the faint chime of a child's laughter riding the solar winds, coming home. Time, on the ragged edge of known space, flows not in straight lines but in gentle spirals, circling back on moments of joy, weaving old threads into new tapestries. Outpost Theta 7, once a footnote in the galactic registry, became something else entirely. A legend whispered in starports and sung in lullabies across 3 systems. Not because of its defenses or its technology, but because it was the place where the most feared being in the cosmos had learned to love, and where a humble technician had taught an empire that kindness could be stronger than conquest. Milo never left Theta 7. He didn't need to. The universe came to him. Every solstice, as promised, Syl returned. At first, she arrived in her mother's pearlescent ship, stepping onto the cracked permacrete with arms full of crystalline fruits from the Valari homeworld and vials of real Earth vanilla she traded for in Martian markets. She'd burst into the common room, now expanded with salvaged modules and painted walls, shouting, "Uncle Milo, I brought sugar," and the entire station would erupt in cheers. Clank, upgraded with a voice modulator and a tiny crown Syl had woven from light, would roll in circles around her feet, beeping the opening notes of "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star." As the years passed, Syl grew, not just in height, but in wisdom. She inherited her mother's grace and power, but tempered it with Milo's humor and heart. When she came of age, she refused the throne, instead founding the Concord of Light, a coalition dedicated not to domination, but to healing fractured worlds through empathy, art, and shared memory. Her first act? Rebuilding Earth's lost libraries using archived data and Valari memory weaving. Her second? Sending a shipment of real wheat, cinnamon, and cane sugar to Theta 7, along with a note, "For the best bakery in the galaxy. Don't argue. I've seen your oven. It's heroic." Milo, grayer at the temples but brighter in the eyes, finally opened that bakery. Not on Mars, but right there in Module 4, between the algae tanks and the comms array. Milo and Syl's cosmic crust became a pilgrimage site. Travelers from a dozen species lined up for cinnamon rolls that shimmered faintly with residual stardust, sourdough loaves that hummed old Earth folk songs, and pastries filled with alien berries that tasted like nostalgia. Eris retired from medicine to become the head taste tester. Lena designed ovens that ran on solar flares. Even Clank got a job, greeting customers with rhyming welcomes and dispensing napkins shaped like tiny spaceships. Queen Lyra visited often, though she rarely wore her crown. She'd sit in the corner booth with a mug of synth coffee, watching her daughter laugh with Milo over flower fights or debate the merits of chocolate versus caramel with a group of wide-eyed Tari cadets. In those moments, she looked not like a ruler of galaxies, but like a woman who'd finally found peace. The conclave was never spoken of again, not out of fear, but because it had been rendered irrelevant. Their ideology, once a cancer on the Valari soul, had been healed not by war, but by the quiet, relentless force of a bond forged in a forgotten outpost. Some former enforcers even came to Theta 7 seeking redemption. Milo gave them aprons and put them to work kneading dough. If you can learn to care for bread, he'd say, you can learn to care for people. Decades flowed like river currents. Milo's hands grew wrinkled, his steps slower, but his spirit never dimmed. On his 80th birthday, the entire station threw a party under the twin moons. Ships from every allied world hovered in silent salute. Syl, now a diplomat of immense influence but still wearing the same silver hairpin Milo had once bent from scrap wire, stood beside him as he blew out candles made of bioluminescent gel. You gave me a home when I had none, she said softly, tears like liquid starlight tracing her cheeks. And you gave me a reason to stay, he replied, squeezing her hand. Best deal I ever made. When Milo finally passed, peacefully in his sleep, with the scent of fresh bread in the air and Clank humming a lullaby at his bedside, the Galaxie mourned. But Theta 7 did not fall silent. Syl returned not as a visitor, but as a guardian. She expanded the outpost into a sanctuary for lost souls of all species. A place where no one was too broken, too strange, or too small to belong. And in the heart of the bakery, beneath a framed photo of a young man holding a glowing orb with a wrench in his back pocket, a plaque read, "Here love was baked daily, served warm, always enough for everyone." The dust storms still came and went. The stars still burned cold and distant. But on that little moon, in that stubborn outpost, something extraordinary had taken root and flourished. Not because of weapons or power, but because one ordinary man chose to open his door and his heart. And in the end, that was enough to change everything.